The sun that morning felt different. It was a late September sun, the kind that pours liquid gold over the world, making every leaf on the old maple in our backyard look like it had been individually dipped in honey. Mark was at the kitchen table, the one with the little chip on the corner from where Michael, our son, had once tried to see if a toy truck could fly. He was behind his newspaper, but I could see his eyes, crinkled at the corners, smiling at me over the top of the business section. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. You're staring, Ruth, he said, his voice a low rumble that always felt like home. Just memorizing you, I said, pouring him a second cup of coffee, the way he liked it black, with 1 sugar. In this light, you look just like the boy I fell in love with. He lowered the paper, folding it carefully. That was Mark, orderly, precise. A man who built his life like he built his architectural firm with a strong foundation and an eye for beauty. I feel like that boy when I'm with you, he said, and he reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His skin was warm, his grip firm. A builder's hand, a husband's hand, a father's hand, even after 30 years. That was the last perfect moment. The last one where the world felt entirely, unshakably right. If I had known, would I have held on tighter? Would I have taken a photograph with my mind, sealed it in a vault? Probably. But we never know when the last perfect day is, until it's gone. The phone call came at 3:17 p.m. I know because I was looking at the clock on the oven, wondering if I should take the chicken out to thaw for dinner. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the words were like shards of glass. Heart attack. At his desk. We're so sorry, Mrs. Ellington. The world didn't go silent. It erupted into a deafening roar of nothingness. The kitchen, my sanctuary with its yellow walls and herb garden on the windowsill, suddenly felt like a foreign, hostile place. I remember sliding down the cabinet, the cool tile, a shocking contrast to the burning numbness spreading through me. I remember the sound of my own breath, a ragged, broken thing. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and somber faces. Our daughter Chloe, just 22, clung to me, her body racked with sobs that seemed too big for her small frame. "Mama," she kept whispering, "what are we going to do?" Michael, 25, stood stiff and tall, his arm around her, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. He was trying to be the man of the family now. My strong boy. In the weeks that followed, the house filled with a silence so heavy it had its own weight. Mark's slippers by the back door, his favorite mug in the cupboard, the smell of his cologne lingering on a sweater in the closet. I'd wander from room to room, a ghost in my own life, touching the things he had touched, trying to find some remnant of his warmth. It was during this time that the children started coming over more. At first, I thought it was out of shared grief, a need to huddle together against the cold wind of loss. "Mom, you shouldn't be in this big house all alone," Michael said one evening, his tone practical, almost businesslike. He was sitting in Mark's leather armchair, and the sight of him there sent a strange little jolt through me. "I'm okay, sweetheart, it's full of your father. That's a comfort." "It's a financial drain, is what it is," he said, not unkindly but firmly. "The property taxes, the upkeep, it's too much for you to manage." I blinked. "Manage? Michael, we've lived here for 28 years. Your father and I paid off the mortgage a decade ago." I know, he said, holding up a placating hand. "But things are different now. Let me help you. I can start handling the bills, the accounts. Take some of the burden off you. It felt off. This wasn't the son I'd raised. The boy who'd cried when he'd scraped his knee, who'd laughed until he snorted at silly cartoons. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. But I was so tired, so hollowed out by grief, that his offer felt like a lifeline, a way to let someone else steer the ship while I was lost at sea. "Okay," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "That would be helpful." A few days later, Chloe came over. She was quieter, her grief a more delicate thing. She found me in the garden, staring at a rose bush Mark had planted for our anniversary. "Mom," she began, twisting her hands. "Michael and I were talking, and we're worried. We don't want you to be taken advantage of." "Taken advantage of? By who, honey?" "You know, by people. There are so many scams, and with Dad's life insurance and the inheritance." She couldn't meet my eyes. "Maybe it would be safer if we consolidated things. Put everything in a family trust. Michael's been reading about it. He says it's the smart thing to do." A cold trickle of unease, the first one, started its slow descent down my spine. This wasn't about grief. This was about money. My children were talking to me about money while the dirt on their father's grave was still fresh. I called my Auntie Grace that night. She was my mother's sister, a woman whose heart was as soft and open as a summer meadow. "Oh, my dear girl," she crooned into the phone after I'd spilled out the story, my voice trembling. "They're just scared. They're losing their father, and they're terrified of losing you, too. They're clutching at what they think is solid ground. Money always feels solid, even when it's not." Her words were a balm. Of course, they were scared. I was scared. We were all just fumbling in the dark. But then I made the mistake of mentioning it to Auntie Clara a week later. Clara was Grace's older sister, a woman who believed that truth was a medicine that should be administered without sugar-coating and often in a large, bitter dose. I was at her immaculate apartment, sipping tea that was too strong. "The children are being very attentive," I ventured. Clara fixed me with her hawk-like gaze. "Attentive or acquisitive?" I flinched. "Clara, that's a terrible thing to say. They're grieving. Grief makes people do strange things. Ruth," she said, setting her cup down with a sharp click. "Some people turn inward. Some turn to God. And some," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "see an opportunity. Mark provided well for you. Very well. And a nest egg like that. It can look awfully tempting to a vulture, even if the vulture is wearing your son's face. Michael is not a vulture," I said, my voice rising with a defensiveness I didn't fully feel. "Isn't he?" she countered. "He's already taken over the bill paying, you said. Now they're talking about trusts. You mark my words, Ruth, this is a campaign. And you, in your grief, are the territory they're trying to capture. Don't just hand them the keys to the kingdom." I left her apartment feeling unsettled and angry. Angry at her for her cynicism, and angrier at myself for the tiny, gnawing doubt she had planted in the fertile soil of my own unease. The doubt began to sprout a few weeks later, when Michael brought Vanessa over for dinner for the first time. Vanessa. Just saying her name now leaves a metallic taste in my mouth. She was a beautiful woman. There was no denying that. Sleek, dark hair, eyes the color of expensive whiskey, and a smile that never quite reached them. She was a financial advisor, Michael had told me, his voice bursting with pride. Brilliant, he'd called her. From the moment she stepped into my home, her eyes were everywhere, assessing, calculating. She complimented the artwork, the furniture, with the precision of an appraiser. Michael tells me this house has quite a lot of equity. Ruth, she said over dessert, her tone light and conversational. In this market, it's a shame to let it just sit here. It's an underperforming asset. I felt a chill. It's not an asset, Vanessa. It's my home. Her smile was condescending, a teacher explaining something simple to a slow child. Of course, it is, but a home can also be the foundation of your financial security. We just want to make sure you're secure. She kept saying we. Later, as they were leaving, I overheard a snippet of their conversation at the door. They thought I was out of earshot. She's so fragile, Michael, Vanessa murmured, her voice low. It's sweet, but it's not practical. We need to be more proactive. And Michael, my son, my firstborn, replied, I know, V. I know. We'll handle it. I stood in the shadow of the hallway, my hand pressed to my mouth, the last remnants of the perfect day with Mark shattering into a million unrecognizable pieces. The war for my life had begun, and I hadn't even known I was on the battlefield. Grief is a peculiar kind of prison. The walls are made of memory, the bars are forged from silence, and the lock is the unbearable hope that things might one day go back to the way they were. In the months after Mark's death, I was a model inmate in my own sorrow. I followed the routines of a life I no longer recognized. I grocery shopped. I paid the minimum on the bills Michael hadn't yet taken over. I even weeded the garden, my fingers digging into the earth as if I could somehow reach through the soil and find the roots of my old existence. But a new routine was being established, one designed by Michael and Vanessa. It started subtly, a series of small, seemingly helpful adjustments that, in retrospect, were the first bricks in the walls of a gilded cage. It was Michael who suggested we meet with a family financial planner. Just to get everything organized, Mom, for peace of mind. The office was cold and modern, all glass and steel, a place Mark would have hated. The planner, a man named Robert with unnervingly white teeth and a suit that cost more than my first car, spoke in a soothing, patronizing tone. Ruth, he said, spreading papers across the gleaming table. I understand this is a difficult transition. The key is to simplify, to de-risk your portfolio. I looked at the statements. They were a sea of numbers that, to me, had always represented security. Mark's pension, his 401k. The life insurance payout that had felt like blood money. Now, Robert was talking about liquidating, moving things into annuities, into stable, low-yield bonds. But Mark always said a diversified portfolio with some growth stocks was the way to go for the long term. I said, my voice small in the large, quiet room. Robert gave me a patient smile. Mark was a different generation, Ruth. Your risk tolerance is much lower now. You're a widow. Your primary concern should be capital preservation. Your risk tolerance. He was talking about me as if I were a child, or an invalid. I looked at Michael, who was nodding along, his expression serious and approving. Vanessa sat beside him, her hand on his arm, a silent co-pilot in this reassignment of my future. It just makes sense, Mom, Michael said. You don't need the stress of watching the market go up and down. What I heard was, you are too old and too simple to understand these things. Let us handle it. I signed the papers. My hand trembled, leaving a shaky signature that didn't look like my own. It was the first of many surrenders. The next brick was the conversation about the house. It happened over a Sunday dinner I hadn't felt like cooking. Vanessa had brought takeout from an expensive Thai place, food that was too spicy and unfamiliar for my grieving stomach. Ruth, Vanessa began, after we'd pushed the containers around our plates for a while. "We've been thinking. This house is so big for one person. And the stairs, well, they're only going to get harder." "I'm 53, Vanessa, not 83, I said, a spark of the old me flaring for a moment. "Of course," she said smoothly, "but planning ahead is wise. There's a lovely new development going up on the west side, single-level villas, very low maintenance, gated community for security. We could use the equity from this place to buy one outright, and you'd have a nice lump sum left over to supplement your income." The thought of leaving my home, the place where I'd raised my children, where every room held the echo of Mark's laugh, was a physical pain. The chip in the table from Michael's truck, the faint pencil marks on the doorframe charting the children's growth. The window seat where Mark and I would drink coffee on Saturday mornings. "This is my home," I said, my voice thick. "I don't want to leave." Michael sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. "Mom, be reasonable. It's not practical. It's sentimental." Sentimental. He said it like it was a disease. It was Chloe, surprisingly, who delivered the most painful blow. She came over one afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed. I thought she'd been crying for her father again, and my heart ached for her. "Mom," she sniffled, sitting on the sofa beside me. "I'm so worried. I had a dream, a nightmare really, that you fell down the stairs, that you were lying there for days and no one found you." I put my arm around her. "Oh, honey, it was just a dream." "But it could happen," she insisted, her voice rising in a panic. "What if it did? I couldn't bear it. Michael and Vanessa are right. A smaller, safer place would be so much better. For my peace of mind, if not for yours." "Please, Mom, do it for me." I looked into my daughter's pleading eyes, and I felt the last of my resistance crumble. They had me surrounded. Michael with his cold pragmatism, Vanessa with her financial jargon, and now Chloe, my baby, using my love for her as the ultimate weapon. How could I fight that? How could I tell her that her peace of mind was costing me my own? I agreed to at least look at the villa. The tour was a study in suffocation. Everything was beige and bland. The windows were small. There was no garden, just a tiny, fenced-in patio of astroturf. It felt like a very nice, very expensive prison cell. "See?" Vanessa said, her heels clicking on the pristine laminate flooring. "No maintenance, no worries. All I could see was no life, no history, no love." I was quiet on the drive home, defeated. When Michael dropped me off, he gave me a rare, genuine smile. "This is a really smart move, Mom. You'll see." I walked into my silent, echoing house and went straight to the bedroom. I opened Mark's side of the closet, burying my face in one of his old sweaters. The scent of him was fading. "What do I do, Mark?" I whispered into the wool. "They're picking our life apart, piece by piece, and I'm just letting them." There was no answer, of course. Just the crushing silence. A few days later, the campaign escalated. Michael sat me down at the kitchen table, the chipped one, with a new set of papers. "It's a power of attorney, Mom," he explained. "Just a temporary one. While we're doing all this financial restructuring and the house sale, it'll make everything so much easier. I can sign documents for you, handle the transfers. You won't have to be bothered with all the tedious details." The words, "power of attorney," hit me like a physical blow. It was the legal equivalent of handing over my soul. I don't know, Michael," I stammered. "That seems like a very big step." His face fell, adopting that wounded expression he'd perfected as a teenager. "Don't you trust me, Mom? I'm only trying to help you. Do you think I would do anything to hurt you? And there it was. The master stroke, the emotional blackmail. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. If I refused, I was the distrustful, paranoid mother, spurning her son's love and help. I was the problem. Tears welled in my eyes. It's not about trust, Michael. It's about still feeling like I have some control over my own life. You're overwhelmed, Mom. That's all. Let me carry this for you, please. He looked so much like his father in that moment, with his earnest, pleading eyes. I saw Mark in him, and my resolve broke completely. I saw the man I had loved more than life itself, and I couldn't say no to his face, even if it was on my son's body. With a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, I picked up the pen. I signed my name on the line that effectively made me a guest in my own life. Later that night, after Michael had left with the signed document, promising to take care of everything, I called Auntie Grace. I was sobbing, the full, ugly, body-racking sobs I usually reserve for the privacy of my shower. I signed it, Grace. I signed it all away. Oh, my sweet girl, she whispered, her own voice thick with tears for me. You're just so tired. You're grieving. It's okay to let people help. But then I heard another voice in the background, sharp and clear. Let me talk to her. It was Clara. She must have been visiting. There was a rustle as the phone changed hands. Ruth, Clara's voice was a whip crack, jarring me out of my hysterics. Listen to me. Stop crying. Right now. I hiccuped into the phone, stunned into silence. You have just handed that boy a blank check on your entire existence, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. A power of attorney? While they're trying to sell your house out from under you? Ruth, open your eyes. This isn't help. This is a hostile takeover. But, Chloe said, I don't care if the Pope himself said it. She interrupted. You are being manipulated, systematically and ruthlessly. Your grief is the tool they're using to pick your lock. Now, you can sit there in your gilded cage and feel sorry for yourself, or you can start fighting back. But first, you have to get angry. I was trembling, clutching the phone. Her words were like a bucket of ice water. They were brutal. They were terrifying. But they were also, for the first time, the truth. And in the pit of my stomach, beneath the ocean of grief and fear, a tiny, hard diamond of anger began to form. Anger, when it first wakes up after a long sleep, is a disorienting thing. It doesn't roar, it whispers. It's a cold spot in your chest, a constant, low-grade hum that colors everything you see and hear. After my conversation with Auntie Clara, the world shifted into a sharper, more sinister focus. The helpful suggestions from Michael and Vanessa no longer felt like kindness, they felt like strategy. Chloe's worried expressions looked less like concern and more like rehearsed performances. The first tangible proof that Clara was right came with the bank statement. Michael, as my newly minted power of attorney, had taken over all my financial mail, but I'd been with the same local bank since I was 18 and Mrs. Higgins, the head teller, had known me since I'd opened my first savings account with birthday money. She was a woman built of solid Midwestern practicality and a deep, abiding distrust of electronic banking. She called me on a Tuesday morning. Ruth, she said, her voice hushed, as if she were sharing state secrets. I probably shouldn't be doing this, but something's not sitting right with me. What is it, Carol? That boy of yours, Michael. He was in here yesterday. Had all the paperwork, the power of attorney, everything in order. But he closed out your money market account, the one you and Mark had for emergencies. Said he was consolidating for you. The cold spot in my chest turned to ice. He closed it? How much was in there, Carol? She told me the figure. It was a number that represented new roofs, unexpected medical bills, the kind of security that lets you sleep soundly at night. Gone. Consolidated. I felt dizzy. Where did the money go, Carol? Did he open a new account? That's just it, Ruth, she said, her voice dropping even lower. He had a cashier's check made out to himself and Vanessa. I asked him, polite as you please, if this was for your benefit. He got all huffy, said it was for a joint investment that would ultimately benefit the whole family, and that it was none of my business. A joint investment. With Vanessa. Using my and Mark's emergency fund. I thanked Carol, my voice a thin, reedy thing, and hung up. I stood in my kitchen, my hand pressed against the cool granite of the countertop, and I tried to breathe. This wasn't just planning for my future anymore. This was theft. Plain and simple. I decided to test the waters. I called Michael. Michael, honey, I was looking for the statement for the money market account. I can't seem to find it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Oh, that? I moved those funds, Mom. They were just sitting there, losing value to inflation. Vanessa found an incredible short-term opportunity. A private equity thing. We'll double the money in 6 months. A private equity thing. I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Michael, that was our emergency fund. That money wasn't for gambling. His tone shifted from casual to irritated. It's not gambling, Mom. It's a strategic investment. You have to trust us. This is what Vanessa does for a living. She's a professional. You wouldn't understand the details. You wouldn't understand the mantra of the manipulator. I'd like to understand, Michael. I'd like to see the paperwork for this investment. Another, longer pause. It's not that simple. These are private documents. Look, you signed the POA. You trusted me to handle this. So, let me handle it. Don't you have a garden to weed or something? The line went dead. He had hung up on me. My son, my little boy, had hung up on me after stealing a large sum of my money and telling me to go weed the garden. The anger was no longer a whisper. It was a scream trapped behind my teeth. I didn't call Auntie Grace. I called Clara. I told her everything, my words tumbling out in a furious, terrified rush. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then Clara said, "Good. Good. Clara, he stole from me. Good that you finally see it," she clarified, her voice grimly satisfied. "Now you know what you're dealing with. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's financial abuse, and it's only going to get worse. You need a lawyer, Ruth." Yesterday. A lawyer? The thought was terrifying. Suing my own son? Taking him to court? The scandal, the shame. It was unthinkable. But so was being penniless and homeless. The unraveling accelerated. A week later, I received a call from the country club where Mark and I had been members for 20 years. My membership had been terminated for non-payment of dues. Michael was supposed to be paying them from my account. When I called him, furious, he said, "Mom, be realistic. You're not going to be playing golf or having lunch there anymore. It's an unnecessary expense. I'm cutting the fat." He was cutting me off from my friends, from my social life, from the last vestiges of the person I used to be. Then the credit card stopped working. I was at the grocery store, of all places, buying the same groceries I'd bought for 30 years. The card was declined. I stood there, humiliated, as the cashier tried it again and again. I had to put everything back and write a check from my rapidly dwindling personal checking account. When I confronted Michael, his explanation was ready. "Your credit was too available, Mom. It's a security risk for a woman living alone. I'm just protecting you." He was protecting me from myself. He was protecting my money for himself. The final straw, the one that broke the back of my denial, came from an unexpected source, my neighbor, Arthur. Arthur was a retired lawyer, a widower who had been Mark's friend. He was a quiet, observant man who kept to himself but missed nothing. He came over one evening, holding a casserole dish, the universal language of condolence and concern. "Ruth," he said, after I'd invited him in and we were sitting in the living room. He looked uncomfortable, twisting his baseball cap in his hands. I don't like to meddle in family business. But I saw something the other day, and it's been eating at me." "What is it, Arthur?" "I was at the new car dealership out on the highway, getting my old Buick serviced. And I saw your boy, Michael, and that girlfriend of his. They weren't there for service, Ruth. They were taking delivery of a brand new, top-of-the-line BMW SUV, $100,000 car. If it's a penny." The air left my lungs. I couldn't breathe. Arthur saw my face and pressed on, his voice gentle but firm. "I know what Mark left you, Ruth. I know you're comfortable, but that kind of expenditure, for a young couple just starting out. I wondered where the money came from. I knew. Of course, I knew. The private equity investment. The closed money market account. My emergency fund was now sitting in their driveway, sleek, silver, and screaming of their betrayal. I thanked Arthur, my voice a ghost of itself. After he left, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I walked slowly, deliberately, to Mark's study. It was the one room I had mostly left untouched. His drafting table was still there, a half-finished sketch pinned to it. His books lined the shelves. It still smelled like him, old paper, cedar, and his particular scent. I sat in his worn leather chair. I put my hands on the desk, on the wood his hands had touched 1,000 times, and I spoke to him, out loud. "They're picking our bones, Mark. Our son, our daughter. They're selling off our life, piece by piece, and using the money to build their own, and I let them." I was so sad and so lost that I handed them the keys. I looked at a framed photograph on his desk. It was the two of us, on our 30th anniversary, on a beach in Maine. We were laughing, squinting into the sun, our arms around each other. We looked so happy, so untouchable. "I can't be that sad, lost woman anymore," I whispered, my voice gaining strength with every word. "If I am, there will be nothing left of us. Nothing left of you. They will have erased you." A profound clarity settled over me. The grief was still there, a permanent resident in my soul. But it was no longer in charge. The anger had teamed up with a fierce, protective love for Mark, for the life we built, and yes, for myself. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Auntie Grace for comfort. I didn't call Clara for a battle plan. I called Arthur. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time in a year. "You said you were a litigator before you retired. Do you still remember how to fight?" There was a long silence on the other end, then a low, dry chuckle. "Ruth Ellington," he said. "I thought you'd never ask." Sitting across from Arthur in his cozy, book-lined den felt like stepping onto a life raft after months adrift in a hostile sea. He'd made tea, a proper English brew in a china pot, and the normalcy of the ritual was somehow more calming than any platitude. "Start from the beginning, Ruth," he said, his kind eyes sharp with a legal intellect I knew had been lying dormant for years. "Leave nothing out. Assume everything is relevant." So I told him everything. The gradual takeover of the bills, the meeting with the financial planner Robert, the pressure to sell the house, Chloe's nightmare, the power of attorney, the closed money market account, the canceled country club membership, the declined credit card, and finally, Arthur's own sighting of the new BMW. I showed him the documents. I had the old bank statements, the paperwork from the financial planner I'd secretly dug out of the recycling, the notice about the country club. Arthur listened, sipping his tea, occasionally jotting a note on a yellow legal pad. He didn't interrupt, he didn't gasp, he just absorbed it all, his face a mask of professional detachment. When I finished, my hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. "They think I'm a fool, Arthur, a simple, grieving widow they can easily manage." Arthur set down his pen. "No, Ruth. They don't think you're a fool. They think you're powerless. There's a difference. A fool doesn't know any better. A powerless person knows but can't do anything about it. They've systematically worked to make you feel exactly that, powerless. The POA was the masterstroke. It legally enshrined your powerlessness." Hearing it stated so clinically made my stomach clench. "What can I do?" "First," he said, holding up a finger, "we need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. You need a complete picture of your finances, everything. Every account, every asset, every stock, every insurance policy. We need to see what's been moved, what's been closed, what's been repurposed." He paused. "Do you have all of Mark's records? His files?" "In his study." I haven't been able to go through them properly." "That's our starting point," Arthur said. "We need to conduct an audit. A forensic audit of your own life. It will be painful, but it's necessary." The thought of spending days buried in Mark's papers, confronting the ghost of our financial life together, was daunting. But the alternative, the beige villa, the silent phone, the empty bank accounts, was worse. "Okay," I said, squaring my shoulders. "I'll start tomorrow." "Good," Arthur nodded. "Second, we need to deal with the power of attorney. We need to revoke it. Immediately. I can draw up the paperwork. But revoking it is one thing. Making sure financial institutions honor it is another. Michael, with Vanessa's guidance, will likely fight it. This could get messy." "Let it get messy," I said, and the ferocity in my own voice surprised me. Arthur gave me a small, approving smile. "That's the spirit." "Third, and this is the most important thing, Ruth, you cannot let them know what you're doing. You have to play the part. You have to be the grieving, compliant, slightly confused mother they think you are. Can you do that?" I thought of Michael's condescending tone, of Vanessa's cold, appraising eyes, of Chloe's manipulative tears. The diamond of anger in my gut burned brighter. "Oh, I can do that, Arthur," I said softly. "For now." The next morning, I went into Mark's study with a mission. It felt different now. No longer a shrine to my loss, but a command center for my reclamation. I started with the filing cabinets. They were meticulously organized, just like Mark. Taxes, going back 30 years, property records, insurance policies, investment statements. I began cross-referencing everything with the most recent statements I could find. Account by account, line by line, the picture of their betrayal came into horrifying focus. The consolidation with the financial planner, Robert, had moved almost all of our liquid assets into funds with high fees and early withdrawal penalties. Funds that would be difficult for me to access without significant loss, but from which, I was sure, Michael was somehow drawing. The life insurance money, which had been in a separate, high-yield savings account, was gone, transferred out in 3 large chunks over the past 4 months. I found the paperwork for a home equity line of credit I knew nothing about. It had been taken out against the house, my house, free and clear for a staggering amount. The signature on the application was mine, but it was a crude forgery. Or, more likely, Michael had signed it himself using the power of attorney. The money from that line of credit was also gone. I sat on the floor of the study, surrounded by a sea of paper, the numbers swimming before my eyes. They hadn't just been siphoning off money. They had been actively looting the fortress, tearing down the walls for firewood. The scale of it was breathtaking. I felt a wave of nausea. This was more than greed. This was annihilation. It was in the bottom drawer of the old oak desk, the one that always stuck, that I found it. Tucked behind a stack of old architectural magazines was a slim, legal-sized envelope. It was heavy, made of rich, creamy paper. It wasn't labeled. My name wasn't on it. Frowning, I pried open the brass clasp. Inside was a single document. The heading made my heart stop. Last will and testament of Mark Abram Ellington. But I had a copy of his will. We'd had them drawn up together. Years ago. I knew its contents by heart. Everything was left to me, and upon my death, to the children in a trust until they were 35. It was standard. It was safe. This was different. This will was dated just 6 months before he died. With trembling hands I began to read. It was, in many ways, similar to the original, but there were crucial, earth-shattering differences. He had left bequests to Auntie Grace and Auntie Clara, in gratitude for their love and support. He had designated a portion of his estate to his alma mater for a scholarship fund. And then I reached Article 7, the section concerning the inheritance of Michael and Chloe. My breath caught in my throat. Mark had added a clause, a powerful, devastating clause. It stated that if either Michael or Chloe, by action or litigious intent, attempts to challenge this will, dispute its provisions, or bring financial or emotional hardship upon my beloved wife, Ruth, in an attempt to gain control of the estate before her passing, then that child would be immediately and irrevocably disinherited. Their share would revert to me, and upon my death be donated to named charities. He had known. Somehow, my sweet, trusting Mark had known. He had seen a flicker of something in Michael, perhaps influenced by Vanessa. Or maybe he'd just understood human nature, the corrosive power of money. He had built a trapdoor into our legacy. Taped to the back of the last page was a handwritten note, on his personal stationery. My dearest Ruth, if you are reading this, then the unthinkable has happened, and I am gone. And if you are reading this, it also means that our children have shown their worst selves to you in your most vulnerable moment. I have loved Michael and Chloe with every fiber of my being, but I love you more. You are my partner, my life. The thought of you being left alone and vulnerable to their ambition, or worse, to the influence of others, is unbearable to me. This will is my final protection of you. It is the shield I could not be. Do not be afraid to use it. Do not let sentiment blind you to their avarice. You are strong, my love, stronger than you know. Be the lioness I see every time I look at you. All my love, now and always. Mark, the tears came then, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of release, of validation, of a love so profound it reached from beyond the grave to defend me. I clutched the paper to my chest, sobbing. the ink of his signature smudging slightly from my tears. He had seen me, the real me, the lioness. I called Arthur, my voice shaking with a mixture of fury and exhilaration. "Arthur, you need to come over, right now, and bring your notepad." When he arrived, I handed him the will without a word. He read it, his eyebrows climbing higher and higher. When he finished, he let out a long, low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Mark, you brilliant, brilliant man. Ruth, this changes everything. This isn't just a shield. This is a tactical nuclear weapon." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice steady. "First, we get this to my estate attorney friend, Sylvia. We need to have it validated and filed with the probate court immediately, superseding the old will. That alone will throw a massive wrench into their plans. Second, we continue our audit. And third," he said, his eyes glinting, "we wait." "Wait for what?" "For them to make their move. It's a reactionary document. It only activates if they challenge you. My guess is, with the money they've already taken, and with this new will, cutting off their future access, they will get desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." He was right. I could feel it. The storm was coming. But for the first time, I wasn't standing in an open field. I was standing in a fortress, with the walls Mark had built, holding the weapon he had left for me. I looked around the study, at the chaos of papers, at the evidence of my children's betrayal. But I also saw Mark, in his chair, at his desk. He was with me, the lioness was awake. And she was hungry. There is a special kind of loneliness that comes from being at war with your own blood. It's a cold that settles in the bones, a silence that rings louder than any noise. In the weeks after I found Mark's final will, I lived inside that silence. I became an actress in my own life, performing the role of grieving, compliant Ruth with an Oscar-worthy dedication that left me exhausted by nightfall. I would answer Michael's calls with a voice carefully calibrated to sound weary and defeated. "How are you holding up, Mom?" He'd ask, and I could hear the barely concealed impatience underneath the concern. "Oh, Michael. One day at a time," I'd sigh. "It's all so much." He'd then launch into an update about the progress he was making, closing another small account, discussing an offer on the house with a very motivated buyer, a friend of Vanessa's. No doubt. I'd make appropriately vague and grateful noises. "Thank you for handling all that, dear. I just don't have the head for it." It was like feeding a wolf just enough to keep it from attacking, while secretly sharpening a spear behind my back. Every conversation felt like a betrayal of the truth I now carried, the secret fire of Mark's last gift burning in my heart. Arthur and I worked in the shadows. His friend Sylvia, a razor-sharp estate attorney with a no-nonsense gray bob and eyes that missed nothing, filed the new will with the probate court. It was done quietly, without fanfare. The legal machinery began to turn, a slow, grinding giant that my children were blissfully unaware of. The first tremor came in the form of a letter. It arrived at Michael's address, as the named executor in the old will, notifying him of the filing of a new, later testament. Arthur had a copy delivered to me by courier. I was in the garden, pruning the roses, my hands buried in the earth, when my phone rang. It was Michael. The veneer of calm was gone, replaced by a sputtering, incoherent rage. "What is this, Mom? What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "A new will. What did you do?" I sat back on my heels, the sun warm on my neck. I made my voice small, confused. "A new will? What are you talking about, Michael? Your father and I had a will. You have a copy. Not according to the probate court, he screamed. This is dated 6 months before he died. What did you do? Talk him into changing it when he was sick? Did you manipulate him? The accusation was so vile, so perfectly projected from his own guilt, that, for a moment, I was speechless. The poison was bubbling to the surface. This was the mistake Arthur said they would make. Michael, I said, my voice trembling with a real, sharp hurt. How could you say that? I would never. I'm coming over. He snarled and the line went dead. I called Arthur. The first rat has left the ship, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Good, he replied. Stick to the script, Ruth. You know nothing. You are shocked and confused. Let him reveal his hand. 20 minutes later, Michael's car, not the new BMW, I noticed, but his old sedan, screeched into the driveway. He slammed the door and stormed up the path, the letter clutched in his fist. Vanessa wasn't with him. This was a solo mission. He thrust the paper at me. Explain this. I took it, making a show of putting on my reading glasses, my hands shaking just enough to be believable. I read it slowly, then looked up at him, my eyes wide. I don't understand. This is your father's signature. But what is this clause? I pointed to Article 7, the disinheritance clause. This sounds so harsh. Why would he do this? I was playing dumb, and it was infuriating him. He snatched the paper back. He wouldn't. That's the point. This is a setup. It has to be. Who knew about this? Did you talk to a lawyer? Was it Arthur? That old busybody next door. Michael, please, I said, wringing my hands. Lower your voice. I don't know anything about this. This is as much a shock to me as it is to you. It was the truest lie I'd ever told. The discovery had been a shock, just not a recent one. He paced the living room, a caged animal. This changes everything. This document attempts to disinherit me, Mom. Your own son. On some paranoid fantasy that I would challenge the will. It's insane. It must be a mistake, I whispered, feeding his narrative, a draft he never finalized. We'll get it sorted out. Damn right we will, he said, stopping his pacing and pointing a finger at me. His eyes were wild. We are challenging this. We are going to court and we are having this forgery thrown out. I have the power of attorney. I control the finances. I will use every cent I need to fight this. And there it was. The explicit challenge. The trigger for the clause. He had walked right into the trap Mark had laid. I felt a surreal mix of triumph and profound sorrow. My son was so blinded by greed that he was actively working to disinherit himself. Is that wise, Michael? I asked softly. Going to court. Wouldn't that be challenging the will? He didn't hear the warning. He was too far gone. It's not a challenge, it's justice. He was probably not in his right mind. Or you. You influenced him. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw not my son, but a stranger capable of truly terrible things. Yeah, he said, the idea taking root in his mind. Undue influence. That's what we'll argue. That you manipulated a sick old man. The air left the room. I felt as if he'd physically struck me. Get out, I said, my voice low and quiet. What? I said, get out of my house. I stood up, drawing on a strength I didn't know I possessed. The lioness was rising. You do not get to stand in the home your father built with the memories of the man I loved and accuse me of that. Get out. He was stunned into silence. He stared at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time, I think he saw a flicker of the woman I was becoming, not the woman he thought I was. Mom, Now, Michael. He left, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the sudden silence, trembling from head to toe. The battle lines were now drawn in ink and law. The quiet, secret war was over. The loud, ugly one had begun. The next day, I was served. A process server came to the door, with a thick stack of papers. In the matter of the estate of Mark Abram Ellington, petition to invalidate later will, due to undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. I was the respondent. My own son was suing me. I took the papers to Arthur. He read through them, his expression grim. It's what we expected. They're claiming Mark was cognitively compromised and that you coerced him into signing a new will that cut out the children in your favor. It's a standard, if ugly, play. He was perfectly healthy 6 months before he died, I said, my voice tight. He was running his firm. He was designing a new public library, for God's sake. We know that, Arthur said. But they'll try to find a doctor, a colleague, anyone who will say he seemed tired or distracted. They'll twist every minor forgetfulness into proof of dementia, and they'll dig into your life, Ruth. They'll look for any evidence that you were desperate for money, that you had a motive. I felt sick. What do? We fight fire with truth, Sylvia said, who had joined us. She placed a reassuring hand on mine. Ruth, this is the hardest part. The discovery process. They will depose you. They will ask you intimate, invasive questions about your marriage, your finances, your state of mind. They will try to provoke you. You must be a stone. You must be calm, factual, and unshakable. Can you do that? I thought of Michael's accusing eyes, of the word forgery hanging in the air. I thought of Mark, believing in me. Yes, I said, I can. The poison had been spilled. The well was contaminated. But I was no longer drinking from it. I was building a new well with cleaner, deeper water. And I was ready for the thirst of a long fight. A lawsuit, I quickly learned, is not a single event. It is a slow, meticulous process of unraveling a life thread by thread, examining each fiber under a harsh light, looking for weaknesses, for stains, for breaks. The petition Michael and his lawyer filed was just the opening move. What followed was a season of digging, a great archaeological excavation of my 30-year marriage, with my son as the foreman of the team determined to prove it was a sham. The first tool in their kit was the deposition. I had to sit in a sterile conference room across a polished table from Michael, his lawyer a slick, predatory man named Mr. Dalton, and a court reporter whose fingers fluttered over her machine like a silent, judgmental bird. Arthur and Sylvia sat on either side of me, my twin pillars of strength. Mr. Dalton began with a smarmy, condescending smile. Now, Mrs. Ellington, we just want to get a clear picture of your relationship with your late husband. For the record. And so it began. He asked me about our finances. Did I feel I had enough spending money? Did Mark keep me on allowance? I explained that we were partners, that we discussed major purchases, but I had always had free access to our accounts. So, you never felt financially constrained? Dalton pressed, his tone implying that of course I must have. No, I said calmly. My husband was a generous and trusting man. He moved on to Mark's health. Did he ever forget things? Appointments? Names? I admitted that sometimes he'd forget to pick up milk or where he left his keys. As do I, Mr. Dalton. as do you, I'd imagine. He didn't like that. He shifted tactics, his questions becoming more intimate, more invasive. Was your physical relationship with your husband satisfactory in the years before his death? I felt a hot flush of humiliation. Arthur put a steadying hand on my arm. Objection, relevance. Your Honor, we are establishing the dynamic of the relationship, Dalton said to the video camera recording the proceedings. I'll allow it, the neutral arbitrator said. I looked straight at Michael, who was staring fixedly at the table, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He couldn't even look at me. My relationship with my husband was loving and private, I said, my voice cold. And it is none of your business, or this court's. The questions continued for hours. Did we argue? About what? Did I ever threaten to leave him? Did he ever express fear of me? Each question was a little knife, trying to find a seam in the armor of our marriage. And through it all, I held fast to the truth, to the memory of our love. It was my anchor in that sea of hostility. While they were trying to paint me as a manipulative harpy, Arthur and Sylvia were building our own case. A much more dangerous one for Michael. This was where we began to spin our own web. Sylvia issued subpoenas for Michael's financial records. It took a fight, but the judge, growing impatient with Dalton's theatrics, eventually granted them. The picture that emerged was a masterpiece of greed and stupidity. The paper trail was a confession. The transfers from my money market account directly to his and Vanessa's joint account. The massive withdrawals from the home equity line of credit, the one with the forged signature used to pay for the BMW, a luxury vacation to Bora Bora, and a down payment on a speculative real estate venture that had already failed. But the real jackpot came from an unexpected source, Chloe. She called me one night, her voice thin and reedy. Mom, can I come over? I need to talk to you. Without Michael knowing. My first instinct was to say no, to protect the fragile peace I was building. But something in her voice, a genuine desperation, made me relent. She looked gaunt when she arrived, her eyes shadowed. She refused tea, just sat on the edge of the sofa, twisting a tissue in her hands. I can't do this anymore, Mom, she whispered. The lawyers, the things they're saying about you, about Dad, it's wrong. I remained silent, letting her talk. Michael, he's not himself. It's Vanessa, she's in his ear all the time. She has these plans. She said we had to act fast, before you woke up and realized what you had. She said you were a simple woman who would be easily guided, but if we waited too long, you might remarry or give all the money away to charity. She let out a choked sob. She said the new will proved you were selfish, that you were trying to cut your own children out. And you believed her? I asked, my voice softer than I felt. I was scared. She cried. After Dad died, everything felt so unstable. Michael and Vanessa seemed so sure, so confident. They made me feel like I was being a naive child for trusting you. They said I had to choose a side. And I chose theirs. The confession hung in the air between us, painful and raw. They have a plan, Mom, she said, her eyes wide with fear. For the lawsuit, Mr. Dalton is going to call me as a witness. He's going to ask me about Dad's state of mind. He told me what to say. That Dad seemed confused and paranoid in those last months. That he said you were spending too much money. That he was worried about you. It was a bombshell, witness tampering, subornation of perjury. This was no longer just about money. This was about corruption of the legal process itself. Chloe, I said, leaning forward, What you're describing is very serious. It's illegal. I know, she wailed. I don't want to lie under oath. But if I don't, Michael will never forgive me. He'll cut me out completely. He's already cut himself out, Chloe, I said gently. By challenging the will, he triggered the clause. He gets nothing. The only one who still has a chance here is you. The truth of that settled over her. She had been clinging to Michael's sinking ship, and only now was she realizing it was pulling her under too. What should I do? She whispered, a lost little girl once more. I didn't give her an answer. I gave her a choice. You can tell the truth. You can come to my lawyers and tell them everything you just told me. It will be hard. It will mean turning against Michael and Vanessa. Or you can go through with their plan and lie for them. But know this, Chloe, if you lie under oath, and we prove it, which we will, you will not only lose your inheritance, you could go to jail. And I will not be able to protect you. It was the toughest love I'd ever had to show. I was giving her a rope, but she had to be the one to climb out of the hole she dug. She cried for a long time, there on my sofa. I didn't comfort her. She was beyond comfort now. She was at a crossroads. 2 days later, she called Arthur's office and asked for a meeting. Her official statement, given with Sylvia and a court reporter present, was a thing of devastating beauty. She laid out the entire conspiracy. The pressure from Vanessa, the coaching from Mr. Dalton, the specific lies she was instructed to tell. She provided text messages and emails that corroborated everything. Vanessa's messages were particularly vile, referring to me as the old bat and the cash cow. With Chloe's testimony, our case transformed. We were no longer just defending a will, we were prosecuting a crime. Sylvia filed a motion for sanctions against Mr. Dalton and to have Michael's petition thrown out of court due to fraud. The web they had spun to trap me was now tangling around them. Every desperate struggle they made only stuck them tighter. Michael was furious, of course. He called me, leaving a screaming voicemail that I saved on my lawyer's advice, accusing me of turning his sister against him. But the most satisfying moment was yet to come. As part of the discovery, we were entitled to depose Vanessa. She arrived at the law office, dressed for battle in a severe black suit, her face a mask of contempt. Sylvia led the questioning, her tone deceptively mild. Miss Valdez, what is QI? Your profession? I am a financial advisor. And how did you advise Michael Ellington regarding his mother's finances? I advised him to help his mother secure her assets, she said smoothly. She was vulnerable after her husband's death. By secure, do you mean moving $150,000 from her money market account into your joint account? Vanessa's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. That was an investment. An investment in what, specifically? A private venture. The same private venture that the BMW was purchased from? Sylvia asked, her voice like silk. Objection, Dalton shouted. Sustained. Sylvia didn't miss a beat. She moved on, asking about the home equity line of credit, the closed accounts, the pressure on Chloe. Vanessa denied everything, her lies becoming more and elaborate. But with each denial, Sylvia would place another document in front of her, a bank statement, a text message, a receipt contradicting her. The cool, collected facade began to crack. The more she was cornered, the more her answers became snippy, arrogant. It's clear you don't understand high finance, she sneered at Sylvia at one point. What I understand, Miss Valdez, is the law, Sylvia replied coolly. And the law has a very clear understanding of theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The deposition ended with Vanessa storming out, her lawyer trailing behind her, looking defeated. I left the building that day with Arthur and Sylvia. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. "Well?" I asked. "We have them, Ruth," Sylvia said, a rare smile on her face. "They're finished. It's just a matter of time now." I looked out at the city, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. My life was no longer ordinary. It had been torn apart and put back together, stronger than before. The web was complete, and we were the spiders, not the flies. There is a peculiar stillness that descends when you know you have already won, but the formalities of the battle must still be played out. It's the quiet after the storm has passed, when all that's left is to survey the damage and count the cost. After Chloe's defection and Vanessa's disastrous deposition, the fight seemed to go out of Michael's case. The frantic energy, the flurry of legal motions, the angry phone calls, it all slowed to a grim, plodding march toward an inevitable conclusion. Mr. Dalton, Michael's lawyer, filed a motion to withdraw from the case. The official reason was irreconcilable differences, but Arthur heard through the legal grapevine that the Bar Association had gotten wind of the witness tampering allegations, and Dalton was scrambling to save his own license. He was cutting the rotting limb loose before the infection spread. Michael was now representing himself, pro se. The most dangerous kind of opponent, Arthur told me, because they are driven by emotion, not strategy. They are unpredictable, and they make mistakes, born of desperation. The first of these mistakes arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't a legal document, but a handwritten letter. The script was Michael's, but it was jagged and slanted, as if written in a fury. "Mom, I don't know what lies Chloe has told you, but you have to believe me. She's always been unstable. You know that. She's jealous of my relationship with Vanessa, of the life we're building. She's trying to destroy me. This has to stop. We are family. This legal battle is destroying Dad's legacy. He would be sick to see what we've become. I'm willing to drop the challenge to the will. All of it. On one condition. You reinstate my inheritance. You give me my fair share. Not all of it. I'm not greedy. But my half. You can keep the house, everything else. Just give me what's mine. This is your last chance to fix this. If you force me to go to court alone, I will have no choice but to tell the whole world what you really are. I have things on you, Mom. Things Dad told me. About your past. Things you wouldn't want anyone to know. Don't test me. Your son, Michael, I read it standing by the kitchen sink, the same spot where I'd received the call about Mark's death. The paper felt filthy in my hands. It was part plea, part threat, and all manipulation. The mention of my past was a low blow, a ghost he was trying to conjure from a time before he was born. Mark and I had both had lives before we met. We'd shared our stories, the light and the shade. The idea that Mark would have weaponized those confidences, shared them with our son to be used against me, it was unthinkable. And I didn't believe it for a second. This was Michael, scraping the bottom of the barrel, trying to find any lever he could pull. I didn't call Arthur immediately. I took the letter, went out into the garden, and I burned it in the old terracotta pot I used for ash. I watched the flames consume his words, the paper curling and blackening until it was nothing but fragile, gray flakes. It felt like a ritual, a cleansing. He had thrown his best punch, and it had turned to ash in my hands. When I told Arthur about it, his face was grim. The threat is empty, but the sentiment is telling. He's cornered. A cornered animal is dangerous. We need to end this, Ruth. We need the final nail in the coffin. That nail, it turned out, was delivered by a private investigator Sylvia had quietly hired weeks earlier. She had been digging into Vanessa's professional background. Something about her didn't sit right, Sylvia told us in her office. The way she talked about finance was all buzzwords and bravado, no substance. It felt like a performance. The investigator's report was a masterpiece of revelation. Vanessa Valdez was not a certified financial advisor. She had never passed the Series 7 exam. The firm she claimed to work for had never heard of her. She had a string of aliases and a history of targeting financially comfortable, insecure men on dating apps, bleeding them dry, and moving on. There were 2 restraining orders from previous boyfriends in different states. She was a grifter, a con artist of the highest order, and my son had been her most lucrative and most pathetic mark. "This is it," Sylvia said, tapping the report. "This is the context the court needs. It's the undue influence we can actually prove. Not you on Mark, but Vanessa on Michael. It explains his complete character transformation. It provides the motive for the entire, sordid scheme. We filed the report with the court as part of our motion for summary judgment. We argued that there was no genuine issue of material fact to be tried. Michael's challenge to the will was baseless and, more importantly, was itself the product of criminal fraud and undue influence perpetrated by his accomplice, Vanessa Valdez. The hearing for the motion was set. It would be the first time I would see Michael in person since the day I'd thrown him out of my house. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the quiet rooms, my mind racing. I ended up in the garage, where Mark's old wooden workbench still stood, covered in a fine layer of dust. On a shelf above it was a small, locked metal box. I knew where the key was taped to the bottom of the first drawer. Mark was a man who believed in secrets and their keeping. I opened the box. Inside weren't secrets, not really. They were treasures. The dried corsage from our first date. A pebble from the beach where he'd proposed. A lock of Chloe's baby fine hair, and one of Michael's, tied with a blue ribbon. And at the bottom, a single, worn piece of paper. It was a letter I'd written him after our first big fight, early in our marriage. I'd been so angry, I'd packed a bag. But instead of leaving, I'd sat down and written him a letter, pouring out all my fear and my love. I unfolded it now, my eyes scanning the faded ink. I am so angry I could spit. But even now, even when I think I might hate you, the thought of not seeing your face tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, is a physical pain. That's how I know this is real. This is forever. We are forever, Mark. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I sank to the dusty garage floor, the letter pressed to my chest, and I wept. I wept for the young couple who had promised each other forever. I wept for the man who had kept this letter for 30 years. And I wept for the son who had thrown away the legacy of that love for the empty promises of a con artist. The next morning, I dressed with care, a simple navy blue dress, pearls, my back straight. I was not going to court as a victim. I was going as a testament. The courtroom was different from the deposition room. It was larger, more imposing, with a high ceiling and dark wood. It smelled of old books and floor wax. Michael was already there, sitting alone at a table. He looked small. His suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt. He didn't look at me. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. The report had done its work. She had fled, a rat from a sinking ship. The judge, a weary-looking woman with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, took the bench. She listened as Sylvia presented our motion, laying out the case with crisp, surgical precision. She outlined the financial abuse, the forgery, the coercion of Chloe, and finally, presented the private investigator's report on Vanessa. "Your Honor," Sylvia concluded, "this is not a case about a will. It is a case about a predator who infiltrated a grieving family and systematically set about to destroy it for personal gain. The respondent, Ruth Ellington, is not the influencer, she is the victim. And her son, the petitioner, is both a perpetrator and a victim of this same malign influence. To allow this farce to continue to a full trial would be a travesty of justice." The judge then turned to Michael. "Mr. Ellington, you are representing yourself?" Michael stood up, his hands shaking as he clutched a few notes. "Yes, Your Honor." "What is your response?" He cleared his throat. It's all lies. My mother, she turned my sister against me. This Vanessa stuff, I didn't know. She lied to me, too. I was just trying to protect my mother. My father would have wanted." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Ellington, this is a court of law, not a forum for familial grievances. Do you have any legal argument or evidence to counter the facts presented by Mrs. Ellington's counsel? Any evidence that your father was of unsound mind when he signed the will? Any evidence of undue influence exerted by your mother?" Michael stood there, his mouth opening and closing. The legal jargon, the procedural walls were closing in on him. He had no evidence. He only had his rage and his hurt. "He was my father." He finally burst out, his voice cracking with a raw, painful emotion that, for a fleeting second, reminded me of the little boy he used to be. "She can't just cut me out." The judge's face was not unkind, but it was firm. "The law, Mr. Ellington, is not concerned with what feels fair. It is concerned with intent and fact. The fact is, your father's intent, as clearly expressed in a legally sound document, was to protect your mother from exactly the scenario that has transpired. By bringing this challenge, you have, by the explicit terms of that document, disinherited yourself." She turned her gaze to the file before her. "The motion for summary judgment is granted. The petition to invalidate the last will and testament of Mark Abram Ellington is dismissed with prejudice. The later will, dated April 12th, is affirmed as the true and final will of the decedent. Furthermore, given the evidence of fraud and financial abuse, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation." She slammed her gavel. "Court is adjourned." The sound was like a gunshot. Final. Absolute. Michael didn't move. He stood frozen at his table, his head bowed. I stood up, my legs weak. Arthur took my elbow, steadying me. As we walked out of the courtroom, Michael finally looked at me. The anger was gone, burned away. All that was left was a hollow, devastating emptiness. I saw the ghost of my son in that emptiness, and my heart shattered into 1,000 new pieces. I had won. I had the house, the money, my life back. I had driven the final, gleaming nail into the coffin of his case. So why did it feel like I was standing at my own son's funeral? Victory, I discovered, has a bitter aftertaste. There were no celebrations, no triumphant toasts with Arthur and Sylvia, though I paid their substantial fees with a gratitude that felt like a lifeline. The house was mine, secure and unassailable. The money was slowly, painstakingly, being returned through the civil judgments Arthur was pursuing. The district attorney had indeed opened a case, and warrants were issued for Vanessa's arrest. The world, it seemed, had righted itself on its axis. But inside the house, the silence was no longer peaceful. It was haunted. The ghost of Michael's final, broken look in the courtroom drifted through the rooms. I'd find myself setting the table for 4 out of habit, only to realize the terrible error and have to put 2 plates away, the clatter echoing in the empty kitchen. The public fallout was a special kind of humiliation. The story was too juicy to stay quiet. Local architect's son in inheritance scandal. The newspaper headline read, "Grifter girlfriend implicated in elder financial abuse." I became a figure of pitying looks at the grocery store and whispered conversations that would stop when I walked by. I was the poor woman whose son had tried to rob her blind. There is no privacy in a small town, especially in tragedy. Auntie Grace came over almost daily, her presence a soft, warm blanket. She didn't offer advice, she just came and was. She'd bake scones, we'd watch old movies, and she'd let me cry when I needed to, which was often. "The heart has to mourn the living too, Ruth," she said one afternoon, her hand patting mine. "You're not just grieving, Mark. You're grieving the son you thought you had, the future you thought your family would have. That's a real loss. Let yourself feel it." Auntie Clara, on the other hand, was having none of it. She descended upon my house one Tuesday like a cleansing thunderstorm. "Enough of this moping," she declared, marching into the living room where I was curled under a blanket, staring at a talk show I wasn't watching. "You won. Act like it." "It doesn't feel like winning, Clara." "Winning rarely does," she retorted, pulling open the curtains and letting in a blast of accusing sunlight. "It just feels better than losing. Now, get up. We're going out." "I don't want to go out." "I didn't ask what you wanted," she said, her hands on her hips. "The world is still turning, Ruth Ellington, and you are still on it. You can either be dragged behind it, or you can get back on and ride. Your choice." She dragged me to the botanical gardens, a place Mark and I had loved. At first, I moved through the lush greenery like a sleepwalker, the beauty failing to penetrate the gray film over my heart. But then we stopped in front of a massive ancient camellia bush, its branches gnarled and twisted, covered in a shocking profusion of perfect, pink blooms. "See that?" Clara said, pointing a bony finger. "That bush is older than both of us combined. It's been through droughts, freezes, storms. It's been pruned back to almost nothing. Look at those scars on the trunk. But every spring, it blooms. It doesn't bloom in spite of the scars, Ruth. It blooms because of them. All that life, all that beauty, is fed by the wounds of the past. You've been pruned back, harder than anyone should be. Now it's time to decide what kind of bloom you're going to be." I looked at the camellia, at its defiant, glorious flowers, and something shifted inside me. The gray film didn't vanish, but it tore. A little light got in. The real work of rebuilding began. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, deliberate actions. I hired a contractor, a kind, respectful man recommended by Arthur, and I finally renovated the kitchen. Not because Michael and Vanessa had told me to, but because I wanted to. I kept the chip table, of course. Some scars were worth keeping. But I chose new countertops, a warm, speckled granite. I picked out a backsplash with tiles the color of the sea. It was my space now, reflecting me. I started having small dinners again. Just Grace and Clara and Arthur. We would play cards, tell stories, laugh. The sound of laughter in the house was a strange, wonderful music at first, but it soon began to feel like it belonged there. And through it all, there was Chloe. Our relationship was a delicate, fledgling thing. She was living in a small apartment, working a receptionist job, and attending court-mandated therapy as part of a deal Sylvia had helped her broker with the DA. She had been a witness, not a mastermind, and her cooperation had saved her from prosecution. She came over for dinner once a week, just the two of us. The conversations were stilted at first, laden with unspoken apologies and a bottomless well of shame on her part. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she'd say, for the 100th time. "I was so stupid." "You were scared," I'd reply, my standard response. It was the truth, but it was also a shield. I had forgiven her, but the trust, that would take time. It was like a precious, shattered vase. We were slowly gluing the pieces back together, but it would never hold water again. It would always be fragile. One evening, she broke down over dessert. "I saw Michael," she sobbed. "He came to my work. He looked terrible. He begged me for money. He said Vanessa cleaned out their joint account before she left. He's going to lose his apartment. He said it was all my fault for betraying him." The news was like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, the maternal instinct, that primal, stupid, unconditional love, flared to life. "Did you give him any?" She shook her head. "No. My therapist. She said I had to set boundaries, that giving him money would just enable him. But Mom, he's my brother." I knew that conflict all too well. The chasm between the person they were and the person you remember, the person you still, desperately, love. A few days later, I was meeting with my new financial advisor, the no-nonsense woman named Brenda. We were going over the statements, the steady, boring growth of the investments she had moved me into. She was explaining a conservative bond fund when I interrupted her. "I want to set up a trust," I said. Brenda looked up, her pen poised. "Okay, for estate planning? For Chloe?" "No," I said, the idea forming fully in my mind as I spoke. "For Michael." Brenda was professional, but I saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Ruth, given the history, are you sure that's advisable?" "It's not for him to access," I explained. "It's a protective trust. The principal would be locked away, untouchable. But it would generate a small, monthly income. Enough for a modest apartment, for food, not enough for anything else. It would be managed by a third-party trustee. He would never know it came from me. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, it was something else, something more primal. It was the lioness, not roaring, but ensuring her cub wouldn't starve, even if he had turned on her. It was my way of separating the son I had loved from the man he had become. I was providing for the ghost of the boy, not the reality of the man. It was the only way I could live with myself. When I told Arthur, he sighed, a long, weary sound. "It's your money, Ruth. You can do what you want with it, but you're building a lifeboat for someone who set fire to the ship." "I know," I said, "but he's still in the water." The most profound change, however, was the one nobody saw. It was the change in how I saw myself. I was no longer Mark's wife. I was no longer Michael and Chloe's mother. Those were titles I would always carry, but they were no longer my definition. I started taking a writing class at the community college. I'd always loved words, but life had gotten in the way. Now, I was writing little stories, vignettes about my life. I joined a book club. I went on that trip to Paris, all by myself. I was terrified at the airport, a 53-year-old woman alone with a suitcase and a phrase book. But I did it. I walked along the Seine, I got lost in the Louvre, and I ate an entire pastry all by myself at a little cafe, and it was glorious. I was learning the most important lesson of all, how to be my own company, how to be Ruth. One afternoon I was in my new kitchen, the sun streaming in over the sea-colored tiles, polishing the granite. I caught my reflection in the dark surface. I saw a woman with lines on her face, yes, lines of grief, of pain. But I also saw a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a quiet certainty. The house was no longer a museum to a lost life. It was the headquarters for a new one. The ashes of the old world were rich and fertile, and I was finally ready to grow. They say time heals all wounds. I've found that to be only partially true. Time doesn't heal the deep ones, it just teaches you how to live with the scar. The phantom limb of my son's absence still ached, a dull, persistent throb beneath the rhythm of my new life. The trust I had set up for him was administered silently, anonymously, through a lawyer in another city. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it allowed me to sleep at night. I had done my part. The rest was up to him. My life had found a new, quiet cadence. Mornings were for writing in the sunroom, afternoons for gardening or my book club, evenings for dinners with my small, fiercely loyal circle. I was, if not happy, then profoundly content. I had built a life that was entirely my own, a fortress of my own making. And for a long while, the world outside my walls seemed peaceful. It was a blustery Tuesday in March when the peace shattered. The rain was lashing against the windows, and I was curled up with a novel, a cup of Earl Grey tea steaming on the side table. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound in the cozy quiet. I wasn't expecting anyone. Arthur was in Florida visiting his sister, and my aunts had a standing date for Thursdays. I felt a prickle of unease, a leftover instinct from the war. I peered through the peephole, and my heart stopped. It was Michael, but it wasn't the Michael from the courtroom, all sharp angles and sharper rage. This man was diminished. He was soaked, his cheap jacket clinging to his thin frame. His hair was too long, plastered to his forehead. He had a gaunt, haunted look in his eyes, and he was shivering. He looked like a ghost, a drowned rat of a ghost, standing on my porch. My first instinct was pure, animal panic. Don't let him in. He's a virus. He will destroy everything you've built. My hand went to the deadbolt, ensuring it was locked. He rang the bell again, a long, desperate press. "Mom?" His voice was muffled by the door and the rain, but I heard the tremor in it. "Mom, please. I know you're there. Please." The please did it. It was stripped of all manipulation, all anger. It was the raw, simple plea of a suffering creature. I thought of the trust fund, the lifeboat I had sent out into the storm. Clearly, it hadn't been enough. With a trembling hand I unlocked and opened the door a few inches, the chain still fastened. The sight of him up close was worse. He was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He smelled of damp wool and despair. "What do you want, Michael?" My voice was colder than I intended. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I have nowhere else to go." His teeth were chattering. "Vanessa, she took everything. The trust money, it's gone. I lost my job. My apartment, I got evicted last week." He was crying now, tears mingling with the rain on his face. It wasn't a performance. This was a complete and total collapse. "The trust was for rent, for basics," I said, my voice hard, trying to armor my heart. "How is it gone?" He looked down at his worn-out shoes, shame radiating from him. I thought I could double it. A guy I met, he had a sure thing. It was a scam. Of course, it was a scam. It's always a scam. He let out a bitter, self-loathing laugh that was more of a sob. "I'm the scam, Mom. I'm the walking, talking scam." I stood there, the wind whipping rain into my hallway, the chain between us a literal and metaphorical barrier. The war was over. I had won. So why did I feel like I was about to lose everything? Please, he whispered again, his eyes meeting mine. In their depths, I didn't see the manipulative son or the avaricious stranger. I saw the little boy who had fallen off his bike and come running to me, bleeding and terrified. I'm so tired. I need a place to sleep, just for one night. Every cell in my body was screaming no. Auntie Clara's voice was in my head, a furious shout. Don't you dare, he'll sink you with him. Arthur's cautious warning, Ruth, you cannot save someone who is determined to drown. But then I saw Mark's face, not in anger, but in sorrow. He would have hated this. He would have hated seeing his son like this. And despite everything, I knew he would have opened the door. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was not Mark. I was the woman who had survived him, and survived the son he'd left behind. I had my own rules now. I closed the door. For a second, through the wood, I heard a broken, defeated sigh. Then, I slid the chain off and opened the door fully. You can come in, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. But these are my rules. You are a guest in my house. You will sleep in the guest room. You will not have a key. You will not ask me for money, not a single dime. You have 1 week to find a job, any job, and you will use your first paycheck to get into a shelter or a shared apartment. You will be out of my house in 30 days, no exceptions. You break any one of these rules, and you are out on the street that minute. Do you understand? He stared at me, stunned, water pooling around his feet on the welcome mat. He nodded, a quick, jerky motion. Yes, I understand. Thank you, Mom, thank you. Don't thank me, I said, stepping aside to let him pass. This isn't a reunion, this is triage. He shuffled in, a pitiful figure dripping on my clean floor. I pointed him to the downstairs bathroom. There are towels in there. I'll leave some dry clothes outside the door. They'll be too big, but they're clean. I went to the linen closet, my hands shaking as I pulled out a towel and an old pair of Mark's sweatpants and a sweatshirt I'd never been able to part with. I left them in a pile outside the bathroom door, hearing the shower running inside. I went to the kitchen and mechanically made a pot of strong coffee. My mind was racing. What had I just done? Had I just let the fox back into the henhouse? Had I undone all my hard-won peace for a sob story? When he emerged, dressed in Mark's old clothes, he looked even younger and more vulnerable. The shower had washed away the grime, but not the exhaustion. He sat silently at the kitchen table, the chipped table, while I poured him a mug of coffee. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the drumming of the rain. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring into his coffee mug as if it were a crystal ball. I'm sorry for all of it, the money, the lies, the things I said, what I accused you of. I was so lost. I didn't reply, I just waited. An apology was just words. I had heard them before. Vanessa, she made me feel like a king, he continued, the words tumbling out now, as if a dam had broken. And then she made me feel like an idiot. She knew exactly what to say, how to twist everything. My grief for Dad, my insecurity about my career. She used it all. She made me believe you were the enemy, that you were holding me back, that I deserved more. He finally looked up, his eyes brimming with a terrible clarity. But I knew, Mom, somewhere, deep down, I always knew it was wrong. I liked the person she made me feel like I was. Powerful, important. I didn't want to let that go. This was different. This wasn't an excuse. This was a confession. He was admitting his own complicity, his own weakness. It was the first step toward truth I had heard from him in years. The person you are is defined by the choices you make when no one is watching, Michael, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And when you thought I wasn't watching, you chose to betray me. You chose to steal from me. You chose to try and destroy the life your father and I built. That wasn't Vanessa. That was you. He flinched, but he didn't look away. He nodded, accepting the blow. I know. And I have to live with that. We sat in the weighted silence again. The storm outside was beginning to abate. The rules stand, I said, standing up. Your week starts tomorrow. The guest room is at the top of the stairs. I'll expect you to be looking for work by 8 a.m. I left him there at the table, in his father's clothes, and went upstairs to my own room. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs weak. I had just let the uninvited guest into my home, and into the carefully guarded fortress of my heart. I had no idea if it was an act of profound foolishness or unimaginable strength. All I knew was that the war was over, but the peace had just become a whole lot more complicated. The first week with Michael under my roof was a study in surreal tension. We moved around each other like planets in an unstable orbit, careful not to collide. The house, which had finally learned to breathe with my rhythm alone, now held its breath. Every creak of the floorboards, every running tap, was a reminder of his presence. True to his word, he was gone by 8 each morning, a list of potential employers, gas stations, warehouses, landscaping crews clutched in his hand. He'd return in the late afternoon, his shoulders a little more slumped each day. The job market for a disgraced, unskilled 20-something with a gap in his resume was brutal. Rejection was his daily bread. We ate dinner together, a silent, awkward affair. I cooked, he washed the dishes. We spoke only of necessities. There's meatloaf. Thank you. The garbage goes out tomorrow. Okay. It was like hosting a very quiet, very sad foreign exchange student from the land of poor decisions. I didn't tell anyone he was here. Not Arthur, not my aunts, and certainly not Chloe. I knew what they would say. I could already hear Clara's blistering lecture. This was my burden to carry, my secret to keep. I needed to see this through on my own terms. The first crack in the ice came on the 5th night. He came home later than usual, and I heard him in the kitchen, rummaging in the fridge. I came down to find him making a sandwich, his movements clumsy with exhaustion. Any luck? I asked, leaning against the doorway. He shook his head, not looking at me. The warehouse job went to someone else. The guy at the gas station said I looked unreliable. He gave that bitter laugh again. Can't imagine why. He finished making his sandwich and stood there, holding the plate, looking lost. I saw Chloe today. My body went rigid. Where? She was coming out of that coffee shop she likes, with a friend. She saw me, and she crossed the street. She looked at me like I was something she'd stepped in. The pain in his voice was naked and raw. I don't blame her. I didn't think it would hurt that much. You tried to destroy her relationship with her mother, I said, my tone flat. You asked her to perjure herself. Hurt is the natural consequence. I know. He put the plate down, his appetite seemingly gone. It's all so real now. The consequences. I spent so long living in this fantasy that Vanessa spun, where I was the wronged prince and you were the wicked queen, but out here. He gestured vaguely at the world outside the window. Out here, I'm just a guy whose sister crosses the street to avoid him. It was the first time he had spoken of the consequences, as anything other than an inconvenience. It was the first glimmer of genuine remorse. The next day was Sunday. I was in the garden, attacking a stubborn patch of weeds with a trowel, channeling my confusion and anxiety into the physical labor. I felt him watching me from the back porch. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice tentative. I almost said no. My garden was my sanctuary, but something made me pause. "You can start on the other side of the path. The dandelions are winning." He came down, kneeling awkwardly on the grass, and began to pull at the weeds. He was terrible at it, yanking at the leaves and leaving the roots behind. I watched him for a few minutes, this city boy who had never shown the slightest interest in the earth. "You have to get the root," I said finally, moving over to him. "See, you dig the trowel in deep, right next to it, and loosen the soil. Then you pull." I demonstrated, extracting a long, taprooted dandelion with a satisfying pop. He watched, then tried again, more carefully this time. He managed to get a whole one out. It was a small, silly thing, but for a moment he looked pleased. We worked in silence for a while, the sun warm on our backs. It was the first time we had shared a space without the weight of hostility or pity between us. "Dad loved this garden," he said quietly, not looking up from his work. Yes, he did. I remember he tried to teach me how to prune the roses once. I wasn't interested. I thought it was boring. He sat back on his heels, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. I wish I'd listened. The simple statement was a lance to my heart. It was so full of regret for 1,000 small, lost moments, not just the one catastrophic betrayal. On the 7th day, he got a job. It was washing dishes at a diner on the highway. The pay was minimum wage, the hours were terrible, and he'd come home stinking of grease and bleach. But he had a job. That night, he handed me a $100 bill at dinner. "What's this for?" I asked, startled. "Rent," he said, "for the week. It's not much, but it's something. A token. For the rules." I looked at the crumpled bill, earned with his own sore, soapy hands. It was the most valuable money I had ever been given. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the principle. He was acknowledging his place here, not as a son, but as a tenant. He was adhering to the rules. I took it. "Thank you." The uneasy peace settled in. He worked his shifts, paid his token rent, and kept to himself. He started reading books from my shelves, old novels Mark had loved. He fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom without being asked, his hands remembering skills his father had taught him. Long ago. I wasn't fooling myself. This wasn't a redemption arc. This was exhaustion. This was a man with no other options, licking his wounds in the only shelter available to him. The core issues, the entitlement, the deep-seated weakness were still there, buried under layers of shame and fatigue. But I saw flashes. Glimmers of the boy he had been. Before the world and Vanessa had twisted him, he had his father's hands, he had my stubbornness. He was a complicated, broken mosaic of us both. One evening, I was in the study, going over some paperwork for the Lioness Fund. He stood in the doorway, watching me. "What's that?" he asked. "It's a charity I started," I said, hesitant to share this part of my life with him. "For women going back to school later in life." He was quiet for a moment. "With the money from my share." It wasn't a question. Yes. He nodded, a look of profound understanding on his face. "That's good, Mom. That's a really good thing." He didn't say it with bitterness or resentment. He said it with something that sounded like respect. The 30-day mark was approaching. He had saved enough from his dishwashing job for a deposit on a room in a shared house. He was packing his meager belongings into a duffel bag. The uninvited guest was preparing to leave. The night before he was set to go, we were once again in the kitchen. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't hostile or awkward. It was contemplative. "I know I can't ever fix what I did," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was low and steady. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that these last few weeks, being here, in this house, with you, it's been the first time I've felt like a human being in years. Thank you for that. For not slamming the door." I looked at my son. He was still gaunt, still carried the shadows of his mistakes, but there was a new clarity in his laughed eyes, a humility that hadn't been there before. "The door is always ajar, Michael," I said carefully. "Not wide open, not anymore, but it's not locked and dead-bolted shut. What happens next is up to you. You have to build a life you can be proud of, one dishwashing shift at a time. And you have to do it for yourself, not for me, and not to earn back what you lost. That's gone. This is about what you can gain." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. "I understand." The next morning, he left. He didn't ask for a goodbye hug. He just picked up his duffel bag, said, "I'll be in touch," and walked out the door. I stood in the sudden silence, the house once again my own. It felt different than before. It wasn't just a fortress anymore. It was a place that had offered shelter, that had witnessed a fragile beginning. The peace was still uneasy, the future uncertain. But for the first time since Mark died, I felt a flicker of something that felt like hope, not for a happy ending, but for the possibility of a quieter, more honest chapter ahead. The lioness had allowed the wounded cub to heal in her den. Now, it was time to see if he could survive on his own. Hope is a delicate seedling. It needs the right conditions to grow: stability, patience, and a constant vigilance against the frost of old habits. After Michael left, I guarded that tiny sprout of hope for him with a fierce, quiet caution. I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks, and I forced myself not to reach out. The rules had been clear. The next move was his. When my phone finally rang, his name flashing on the screen, my heart hammered against my ribs. I let it ring 3 times, steadying my breath before I answered. "Mom?" His voice was different. Not the broken whisper from my porch, nor the arrogant tone from before the fall. It was steady. I got a new job, a better one." He was working in the stockroom of a small, local hardware store. The pay was still meager, but it was a step up from the diner. The owner, a gruff man in his 60s named Frank, was teaching him about inventory and had him helping customers with simple questions. "He says I have a good head for it," Michael said, and I could hear the faint, almost forgotten sound of pride in his voice. It's honest work." Those 2 words, honest work, meant more to me than any grand apology. They were an acknowledgement of the value of earning something with your own 2 hands, a value his father had lived by. We began to talk, briefly, once a week, not as mother and son reclaiming a lost bond, but as 2 acquaintances tentatively feeling their way forward. We discussed the weather, a movie he'd seen, a book I was reading. We carefully avoided the minefields of the past: Vanessa, the lawsuit, the money. It was a conversation built on a foundation of eggshells, but it was a conversation. Meanwhile, the wheels of the justice system, which had ground to a near halt during the civil case, began to turn with a grim, deliberate speed. Sylvia called me one afternoon, her voice crisp and professional. They found her, Ruth, Vanessa. She was living under an alias in Phoenix, working at a call center running another, smaller-scale investment scam. She's been arrested and extradited. The DA is moving forward with charges. They want to talk to you. And to Michael. The news sent a cold shock through my system. I had almost managed to compartmentalize Vanessa, to think of her as a venomous snake that had slithered away into the undergrowth. Now, she was back, and her trial would drag everything into the harsh, public light once more. I agreed to meet with the prosecutor, a serious young woman named Anna Flores. I repeated my story, the same one I'd told in the deposition, my voice calm and flat. It was easier this time. The raw pain had been cauterized. Now it was just a fax. Then came the harder part. Miss Flores needed Michael's testimony. His cooperation was crucial to proving the pattern of fraud and the specific intent to exploit me. I was the one who had to call him. I didn't want to. I was afraid this would shatter the fragile truce we'd built, that the pressure would send him spiraling back into denial or rage. "Michael," I said when he answered, my voice carefully neutral. "It's Mom. The district attorney's office called. They've arrested Vanessa. They want you to testify." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clatter of the hardware store in the background. I braced for the explosion. Instead, he let out a long, slow breath. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What do I need to do?" His simple acquiescence stunned me. "You're willing to do that? It's the truth, isn't it?" he said, a grim resolve in his tone. "I helped her. I was her inside man. I have to own that. If I don't, then nothing I'm doing now, this honest work, means anything. It's just another performance." Tears pricked my eyes. This was more than I had dared hope for. This was accountability. The trial was a short, brutal affair. Vanessa's defense was flimsy, a desperate attempt to paint Michael as the mastermind and her as a misguided follower. But the evidence was overwhelming. The paper trail, Chloe's testimony, and now Michael's damning, calm confession from the witness stand. I sat in the gallery, a few rows back, watching him. He was sworn in, and he didn't look at me. He looked at the prosecutor, and then at Vanessa. He recounted it all. The initial meeting, the flattery, the gradual isolation, the manipulation. He described how she had coached him on what to say to me, how to exploit my grief. His voice never wavered. He didn't make excuses. He simply stated the facts, his own shame and culpability woven into every sentence. When the prosecutor showed him the document with the forged signature for the home equity line of credit, he confirmed it was his handwriting. "And why did you do that, Mr. Ellington?" Miss Flores asked. "Because she told me to," he said, his gaze finally shifting to Vanessa. She stared back at him, her face a mask of cold hatred. "And because I wanted the money. I wanted the life she promised. I was weak, and I was greedy, and I betrayed my own mother for it." His words hung in the air, a stark, unvarnished confession. There was no theatrics, no self-pity. It was just the ugly, honest truth. Vanessa was found guilty on all counts: grand larceny, fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The judge, citing the calculated, predatory, and heartless nature of the crimes, sentenced her to 5 to 10 years in state prison. As the bailiffs led her away, she shot one last, venomous look at Michael. He met her gaze, and for the first time I saw no fear in his eyes, no lingering attachment. I saw only pity. And in that moment, I knew he was finally, truly free of her. We didn't speak in the courtroom. He was surrounded by reporters, and I slipped out a side door. But later that evening, my doorbell rang. He stood on the porch again, but this time, he was dry, and he stood tall. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded and led him to the kitchen. He didn't sit. He just stood there, looking at the chipped table, at the familiar surroundings that had witnessed the best and worst of our family. "I meant what I said in there," he began, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Every word, I need you to know that." Testifying, it was like lancing a wound. All the poison came out. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I feel clean. For the first time in years, I feel clean." I looked at my son, truly looked at him. The ghost was gone. The gauntness was being replaced by solid muscle from lifting boxes at the hardware store. The shame in his eyes had been replaced by a weary, hard-won peace. "I'm proud of you, Michael," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, and I knew instantly they were true. I wasn't proud of what he had done. I was proud of what he had done today. I was proud of the courage it took to face his own demons in a public courtroom and call them by their name. He flinched as if my words were a physical blow, and then his face crumpled. He didn't sob, but tears streamed down his face, silent and cathartic. "Thank you," he choked out. That means more than anything." He didn't stay long. He had to open the store for Frank in the morning. But before he left, he hesitated at the door. "Chloe," he said, is there any chance she'd talk to me?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's a bridge for you to build, brick by heavy brick. And you have to be prepared for the fact that it might never hold weight." He nodded, accepting this, too. Okay. After he left, the house felt different again. The reckoning was over. The villain was in a cage, and the victim had become a witness for the prosecution. The scales of justice, in their cold, impersonal way, had been balanced. But this chapter wasn't about justice. It was about a son looking his mother in the eye and finally telling the truth. It was about a mother finding a way to be proud of the man he was becoming, even as she mourned the boy he had been. The hope I had been guarding so carefully wasn't a seedling anymore. It had put down roots. Life, in its stubborn, persistent way, began to normalize around a new reality. The scandal faded from the town's gossip cycle, replaced by fresher dramas. My life settled back into its quiet rhythm, but the melody had changed. It was no longer a solitary tune. It was now a composition with room for a second, distant instrument. Michael and I established a routine. He came for dinner every other Sunday. It was no longer a tense, obligatory meal, but a genuine, if still somewhat cautious, visit. He talked about his job at the hardware store with a growing expertise. Frank, the owner, was talking about promoting him to assistant manager. He was dating, tentatively, a nice woman named Sarah who worked at the library. He brought her to dinner once, and she was quiet and kind, with a calm steadiness that seemed good for him. He never mentioned money. He never asked for anything. He paid for his own phone, his rent at the shared house, his groceries. He was building a life, a simple, self-sufficient one, and the dignity he derived from it was palpable. The true test, however, was Chloe. I had kept her informed of Michael's baby steps, of his testimony at the trial. She listened, her expression unreadable, offering only non-committal hums in response. The betrayal from her brother ran deep, a wound that had festered longer than mine. She had trusted him, looked up to him, and he had used that trust to make her an accomplice in his own moral collapse. The first meeting between them happened at my house, on neutral ground. I was the nervous hostess, fussing with a pot roast, my stomach in knots. When the doorbell rang, I let Michael answer it. I stood in the kitchen, listening. "Chloe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Michael." Her reply was a block of ice. They came into the kitchen, and the air was so thick with tension you could slice it. Dinner was a quiet, painful affair. Michael tried to make conversation, asking about her job, her life. Chloe answered in monosyllables. It was after dessert, as I was clearing the plates, that it finally broke. "Why, Michael?" Chloe's voice was quiet, but it vibrated with years of pent-up hurt. "Just tell me why. You were my big brother. I trusted you more than anyone in the world. And you looked me in the eye and you lied to me. You made me lie to Mom. You made me a part of that." Michael put down his fork. He didn't look away from her. "There is no why that will ever make it okay, Chloe. I was selfish. I was weak. I was so caught up in what I wanted, in the person Vanessa made me feel like I was, that I was willing to sacrifice you. I sacrificed our family. I can't ever take that back." "I know you can't," she cried, tears finally spilling over. "So what am I supposed to do with that? Just pretend it didn't happen? Welcome you back with open arms because you got a job at a hardware store?" "No," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to do anything. You can hate me for the rest of your life. You have every right. All I can do is stand here and tell you that I am sorry. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry for what I did to you, to us. And I will spend the rest of my life being the kind of man you can maybe, one day, not be ashamed to call your brother." He didn't try to hug her. He didn't try to minimize what he'd done. He just sat there, offering her his remorse, without any expectation of reward. Chloe stared at him, her chest heaving. Then, without another word, she stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out. Michael slumped in his chair, the fight gone out of him. "I guess that's that," he said, his voice hollow. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe that was the first brick." It took time, months of it, but slowly, tentatively, Chloe began to thaw. She started responding to his text messages. They met for coffee, just the two of them. I heard from both of them, separately, about how awkward it was, how painful. But they kept showing up, they kept trying. The turning point came on a bright Saturday in October. We were all at my house, a deliberate, planned gathering. The three of us. We were in the backyard, and Michael was helping me winterize the rose bushes, showing me a trick Frank had taught him. Chloe was watching from the porch steps. He was explaining about root protection when he stopped, looking at a particular, gnarled old bush. "This is the one, isn't it? The one Dad planted for your anniversary." I was surprised he remembered. "Yes, it is." He reached out and gently touched a late-blooming flower. "It's still here. After everything, it's still blooming." Chloe came down the steps and stood beside him. "He'd be glad you're here," she said softly, not looking at him, but at the rose. "He'd be glad you're helping Mom with the garden." It was a small thing, a simple statement. But it was an acknowledgement. She had included him in the family narrative again. Michael's eyes glistened. "I hope so," he whispered. They didn't hug. They didn't have a dramatic reconciliation. But they stood there, side by side, looking at their father's rosebush, and for the first time in years, the space between them wasn't filled with anger or betrayal. It was just space. And it felt like it was finally starting to close. That evening, after they had both gone home, I sat in the quiet of my living room. The house felt full. Not with people, but with the echoes of the day, with the fragile, beautiful possibility of a future I had thought was lost forever. I thought about the foundation Mark and I had laid. For years, I believed Michael had taken a sledgehammer to it, reducing it to rubble. But I was wrong. He had only damaged the house we built on top of it. The foundation, the love, the values, the memories had held. It was cracked and scarred, but it was solid. And now we were all, in our own ways, building something new upon it. Not the same house. That was gone. This new structure was different. It had more windows to let the light in. It had stronger locks on the doors to protect what was inside. It was built with the hard-won wisdom of survival. I was no longer just the keeper of a lost past. I was the architect of a mended present. Michael was building his own small, honest life upon his corner of the foundation. Chloe was learning to trust again on hers. The war was over. The siege had ended. I had won everything back, but not in the way I had once imagined. I hadn't won back the perfect family portrait. I had won back the raw materials, the love, the respect, the truth, and the sacred right to build something new, something stronger, and entirely our own. The lioness had not just reclaimed her den, she had overseen the rebirth of her pride. And as I turned out the lights and went upstairs, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that whatever came next, we would be ready. There's a quiet that comes not from absence, but from wholeness. It's the silence of a clock ticking in a well-loved room, of a kettle coming to boil on a stove that has cooked 1,000 meals. It's the peace that settles in your bones when the storms have passed, and you stand, drenched but upright, surveying a landscape that is forever changed, yet unmistakably your own. This is the quiet that fills my house now. It's a Tuesday morning, and the late spring sun is streaming through the windows of the sunroom, catching dust motes that dance like tiny fairies. I'm at my desk, the one that was once Mark's, but is now unequivocally mine. The surface is tidy, holding my laptop, a cup of tea, and a stack of applications for the Lioness Fund. We're selecting our next scholar today. A woman named Maria, 58 years old, who wants to become a paralegal after her husband left her with nothing but debt and a broken spirit. Her essay made me cry. I see myself in her words, that terrifying feeling of powerlessness. I see the lioness, waiting to be awakened. The doorbell chimes, a soft, familiar sound. I don't startle, I know who it is. I open the door to Michael. He's holding a small, flowering plant in a terracotta pot. His hands, once soft and accustomed to holding nothing heavier than a smartphone, are now calloused, with dirt permanently etched under the nails. They are his father's hands. For you, he says, a shy smile playing on his lips. Frank got a shipment of heirloom tomatoes in. This one's called a Sun Gold. He says they're the sweetest you'll ever taste. I thought we could plant it together later. I take the plant, its leaves a vibrant, hopeful green. Thank you, Michael. It's beautiful. He comes in, toeing off his work boots at the door, a habit he learned during his time as a guest that has now become an unshakable rule. He doesn't come empty-handed anymore. Sometimes it's a plant. Sometimes it's a new type of screwdriver he thinks I might find useful. Once, it was a beautifully bound, blank journal. For your stories, he'd said. The gifts are never extravagant. They are thoughtful. They are tokens of a life being rebuilt, one careful, deliberate brick at a time. He's the assistant manager at the hardware store now. Frank relies on him. My son, the former financial predator, now spends his days discussing paint schemes and fertilizer ratios with retirees and young couples starting their first gardens. There is a poetry in it that never fails to move me. We have coffee in the kitchen, at the chip table. He tells me about Sarah, about how they're talking about moving in together. He speaks carefully, gauging my reaction. There is no demand for approval, only a desire to share his life. I'm happy for you, Michael, I say, and I mean it. She seems like a very grounded person. She is, he nods. She doesn't put up with any of my nonsense. She calls me on my stuff. I need that. We are not mother and son as we once were. That relationship, the one of unconditional, blind trust, died in the fire of his betrayal. What has grown in its place is something different, something more mature and perhaps more durable. It is a relationship of choice. We have chosen to be in each other's lives. We have chosen to do the hard, awkward, painful work of building a new connection from the ashes of the old. It is a connection built not on obligation but on a hard-won and fiercely protected respect. Later, Chloe arrives, her key turning in the lock. She lets herself in, calling out, "Mom? I'm here. I brought bagels." Her relationship with Michael is still a careful dance. They are not the confidantes they once were. The easiness of their childhood is a memory they can look at but not touch. But the hostility is gone. It has been replaced by a cautious, growing affection. They talk. They laugh, sometimes a sound that still surprises me with its joy. They are building their own bridge, and I have learned to stand back and let them, offering support only when the footing seems unsure. The three of us sit at the table, sunlight warming the old wood. We talk about Maria's application, about Michael's promotion, about Chloe's new project at work. We are a family. A fractured, mended, scarred, and beautiful family. This is what winning everything back looks like. It doesn't look like a triumphant parade. It looks like a quiet Tuesday morning with bagels and coffee. It looks like a tomato plant waiting to be put in the earth. It looks like the three of us, sitting together, not needing to fill the silence with words, because the silence itself is a testament to our peace. After they leave, I go back to my sunroom. I look out at the garden, at Mark's rosebush, now flanked by the new plants Michael and I have put in together. I think about the long, dark road that led me here, the gut-wrenching grief, the chilling betrayal, the terrifying loneliness of the lawsuit, the fierce, protective anger that saved me, and the even more terrifying act of mercy opening the door to the son who had shattered my world. So, if you're listening to this, if you've stayed with an old woman through her long and winding story, you might be wondering what the point of it all was. What's the moral? What is the lesson of the lioness? It's not a simple one. It's not. Blood is thicker than water, because sometimes the water of chosen family can be a cleaner, truer drink. And it's certainly not forgive and forget, because some things should never be forgotten. The scars are a part of the story. They are the map of where you've been. The lesson is about power, your own innate, unassailable power. We are taught, especially as women, to be gentle, to be accommodating, to be the soft place for others to fall. And there is a profound strength in that softness, a resilience that is too often mistaken for weakness. But there is another kind of strength, a fiercer strength, the strength of the no, the strength of the boundary, the strength of the righteous anger that says, "You may not treat me this way." My great failure wasn't that I loved my children too much. My failure was that I loved them instead of myself. I let my identity as a mother and a wife eclipse my fundamental right to be my own person. I confused grief for helplessness. They thought I had no power. They saw a middle-aged widow, softened by loss, defined by her relationship to a man who was gone. They saw a resource to be managed, an obstacle to be removed. But they were wrong. The power was always there. It was in my hands that had built a home and tended a garden. It was in my heart that had loved a good man for 30 years and had the capacity to survive losing him. It was in my spirit that had endured the unbearable pain of my own child's betrayal and found a way not just to survive, but to rebuild, to renew, to thrive. I had to reach down into the depths of my own soul, past the grief, past the fear, and find the lioness my husband had always seen. I had to let her roar. And then, I had to learn when her silence was even more powerful. Your power does not come from anyone else. It does not come from your relationship to them. It comes from you. From the life you have lived, the battles you have already fought, the scars you have earned and survived. You do not need to be loud to be strong. You do not need to be cruel to be firm. You just need to be unwavering in your commitment to your own sovereignty, to the truth of who you are. Let them think you have no power. Let them underestimate you. It is the greatest advantage you will ever have. Tend your garden, bide your time, gather your strength, forge your weapons of truth and boundary and unshakable self-worth. Because when the time comes to fight for your life, you will find that you already have everything you need right there inside you. You are the lioness. Now, go and roar. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.